What's going on, everybody? So today I'm sharing with you all my Chirrut Force aggro deck. This is something that's really been quite a powerhouse, especially with all the Force synergies. But a lot of you actually requested this one, and I have been tinkering with it, as with all my decks over the past, basically month at this point, because I've been playing an absurd amount of Star Wars Unlimited. But if you have any other leaders, decks, ideas that you want to see kind of put into action, or at least my thoughts on, perhaps I'll make them into a video. Let me know in the comment section down below, and subscribe, because I'm coming out with daily either deck techs, gameplay, or when we start getting to the spoiler season of the new set, if they decide to go ahead and put out a bunch of spoilers for it, then I'll be giving you all updates on that, so be sure to subscribe. But today we got Force aggro. Super fun deck. I love all the Force synergies. It's one of my favorite things to do. My absolute favorite thing to do is abuse the duo pipped cards like the Cunning, Vigilance, etc. But after that, Force synergies, and then after that, Leia is still one of my favorite decks, and something that has a special place in my heart because it's one of my first physical decks. But this is one that I've been using kind of in the mix between the Grand Inquisitor as well as the Mono Green Tarkin as of the last couple of weeks, and it is really powerful. It attacks on a separate avenue than the normal aggro decks do, but it still has the same kind of aggro theme and is really pushing Chirrut as the earliest Force leader that you can deploy, and then leveraging the fact that he cannot be killed when he comes down to pump him up and really benefit from Chirrut's Force synergy. So let's start off here and dive into the leader and the base that we got going on. We are playing Chirrut Red today. He is a 5-costed leader. His action, not incredibly relevant, but in some cases you can benefit from it, such as giving like a Sentinel +0/+2 and getting an additional block out of it, or potentially, trying to give your, I don't know, Mace Windu +0/+2 so that you can ambush or attack again after he gets readied up again. Something like that is decently relevant, but outside of that, this is not an action that you're really going to be using all the time. It's one of the few leaders where we're using him mainly for the backside, which is what I want to focus on. So as I said, 5 costs to deploy, or 5 resources to deploy, and he is a 3/5. His ability, you cannot be defeated by having no remaining HP. This is a very strong ability because it allows you to guarantee apply whatever buff or whatever upgrade or whatever you're trying to put on this character during that turn, right? So if they smack it and then you apply a buff, well, guess what? You're not going to have 0 HP anymore, ideally, or maybe you could heal him up, or maybe you could do whatever it is you're trying to do. And then perhaps you could maybe deploy a Sentinel or deploy something to protect Chirrut. And even if that's not the case, oftentimes when you deploy your leader, it's one of the last actions that you're doing during the turn. And so there's a good chance that they won't even be able to respond to this and actually be able to attack it when he comes down. So you could already start to buff it and get a ton of value. He is not the only Force unit in the deck, but he is a guaranteed one that comes down very early. As I mentioned, we're playing Chirrut Red. We are running Tarkin Town. I do like the epic action in this deck because you oftentimes will be able to go ahead and finish off random units. Since we are playing blue, it is not as quick as some of the green-red Rebel Heroism aggro decks, but because we are kind of more of aggro, I guess you'd say aggro / mid-range, this epic action does come in handy very frequently. And sometimes you can just, ping in a little bit and then smack someone down with a Tarkin Town, and then really open up the way to potentially place one of your upgrades or your Force synergies on one of your other Force units, which we'll get to in just a moment as we talk about the ground units. Before we do that, though, I figured it'd be probably smart to start off with the events and upgrades in this list, because this list has a ton of them and is kind of the reason why we're playing Chirrut Red with the Force synergies, okay? So we have, starting us off, 3 copies of Force Throw. This is a very powerful effect, but you do need to have a Force unit to really feel the power of this. This synergizes very well with the other Force cards and other upgrades that we do have, because, oftentimes this is going to hit a 2 or 3 cost card. If your opponent is kind of playing around your force synergies, they probably have force throw on their mind. And so they don't want to discard, obviously a 6 drop or 5 drop or 7 drop. In some cases, you may get a 5, 6, 7 drop. And in other cases, when you're fighting like Boba, they oftentimes have less cards in the hand because they can deploy a lot of things. So you might just catch something that you might be otherwise surprised that they had to discard. Dealing 2, 3, 4 damage, whatever it is, all super relevant, and oftentimes will kill one of the earlier threats on turn 4, right? Because what you could do is turn 4, deploy Chirrut, deploy force throw, and then also deploy multiple other of your other events here, which is really, really powerful, right? Because we're going to have 5 resources, and that's going to be something that you really need to pay attention to. Next event, we have 2 copies of It Binds All Things. You get to heal up to 3 damage from a unit, and if you control a force unit, you could deal that much damage to another unit. This is really, really powerful in order to kind of keep Chirrut churning, as well as, remember, because he can't be defeated, you can potentially heal up enough damage to where he doesn't get defeated at the end of the turn. This is really, really, really important for Chirrut if you are under a lot of pressure, okay? If you find that he's just going to die, this is one of those cards that can really swing it because, and I say die lightly because you can't die right till the end of the turn, but they're going to smack your Chirrut. Not only do you get to heal, but you also get to kill one of their units to potentially save Chirrut going forward. This is one of those cards, though, that is a little bit more swingy, right? Because if you don't heal the 3 damage, it's a lot less damage to an opponent unit. And of course, if you don't have a force unit, it's just a really bad repair. So you do need to have the 4 synergies, and we do have more characters other than Chirrut to support that. 1 copy of Carabast. This is, well, something to synergize with Chirrut's action ability as well as Chirrut himself. So you're going to be able to go ahead and potentially hit someone for like 6 damage. If they are trying to kill Chirrut, you keep him alive, boom, you smack them for 6 damage. It's a really efficient removal spell, but again, it is very situational, so we only have 1 copy. 2 copies of Open Fire. This is, again, just kind of another version of our removal suite that we have in this deck, just to give you a little bit more interaction. If you're able to keep some of your upgrades or events on some of these force units and then kind of clear the way with Open Fires and some removal spells, this aggro deck / mid-range deck is really, really powerful on leveraging those upgrades and events. Next one here, we have 3 copies of the Force is With Me. So this is one of the most impressive force synergy cards that you have in the deck, okay? You can not just play this on Chirrut, by the way. We have Yoda in the deck. We have Obi-Wan. We have other cards to synergize with this. So if you were to go turn 2 Yoda, it's a 2/4, very, very respectable body. Turn 3, you go Force is With Me. You get to potentially kill off one of their units or just hit them for 4. You get to restore to your base, and you get to not take any damage on your Yoda. So now it is a 4/6, which can't even be takedown, which is super relevant as well. And you get to really play a nice game against aggro decks. But even if you just have this on something like Chirrut, guess what? As I mentioned earlier, you deploy Chirrut, you force throw, you Forces With Me, and suddenly you have a 5/7 Chirrut with a shield token, and you didn't have to waste any additional actions actually attacking with that unit. So you actually might be able to, if let's say they're playing like Leia or Tarkin or whatever, 5 resource leader that they have on the opposite side of the battlefield, might actually be able to take initiative because you've deployed and attacked with your leader with 1 spell, or you deploy your leader, you're able to play your spell and attack, which is something that not every leader can do. 1 copy of Takedown. This is particularly good against the Boba matchup, and something that is a little bit better than Open Fire. So we have a couple more in the sideboard, which we'll talk about later. And then we get to the last portions of our kind of Force synergy suite. We have 1 copy of Luke's lightsaber. This is really just good on a lot of different units, right? If you attach this to, again, like a Yoda or even a Chirrut, you can really, really benefit from the +3/+1. It's super, super good. But we do have a couple copies of Luke. If you don't have, something that has decently high toughness to slap this on, again, Yoda is one of the key things to put it on because it turns it into a 5/5, which is really, really annoying, especially since he has Restore 2, and he can give you the cards back when he dies. But if you have the Luke on the battlefield, which we do have a couple copies of, this can be one of the most swingy plays against the more controlling, more mid-rangey decks, because you deploy Luke, kill a unit, they're trying to kill off Luke because it's got Restore 3. That is a nightmare to race against or try to compete against. Boom. If they don't kill him in one shot, which they probably won't, and you can even use your action from Chirrut to prevent that, you get to heal all of the damage off of Luke, which is really strong, but not super consistent. So this is why we have one copy that you can always resource early. Jedi Lightsaber is the last, and this one is really important. We have a full 3 copies of this card in our deck because it is +3/+3, a very absurd stat line, right? With the added bonus of giving the defender -2/-2 on attack if that unit is a force unit. This is another one that's really good on something like a Yoda or a Kanan or Chirrut himself. If you go turn 4, deploy Chirrut, Jedi Lightsaber him, you basically win the game oftentimes. That is a very strong combination because you could start knocking off all of their units over and over and over again. And then you could follow that up with, guess what? You have 2 more resources left over. If you attack into something, maybe he takes a couple points of damage, it binds all things to follow that up. Boom, hit something else for a little bit of damage, or maybe follow it up with a force throw, maybe follow it up with a Carabas, maybe on the following turn you follow up with a Forces with Me. So now the Chirrut, it can't be vanquished, it can't be takedown because it doesn't have 5 or less remaining HP, right? Which is one of the few ways you can actually deal with Chirrut. You get to go ahead and have him be a 6/8, followed that up with a Forces with Me. It is now an 8/10 with the shield token that you got to attack with as well. And oftentimes the attack will prevent you from removing that shield because it gives -2/-2 on the defender. This gets really absurd really quickly, and it doesn't have to be with Chirrut, but again, he's the one that's most reliable in the deck because he's always going to come down on turn 4. Really sweet event/upgrade suite. This is the reason you play the deck. Again, the force synergies. But let's get to the ground units, which shore up a lot of the force synergies that we have in this deck. So starting us off here in the ground unit category, we have 2 copies of Guardian of the Wills. Now, there's a few reasons that we're running this card, but a lot of people don't realize this has the force tag, okay? So while the ability is good in this deck because you can play things like Luke's lightsaber, let's say you go turn 2, Guardian of the Wills, you can actually immediately Luke's lightsaber it, and it's a 5/3, which is pretty impressive, and it can sometimes trade and survive. But to be honest, we don't necessarily care about that a ton. It's that if you have a turn where later on in the game, maybe you want to deploy a force unit, but you don't want to have it get killed immediately, or rather, you want to make sure you can get to that second turn, or maybe you could deploy a spell immediately after to buff it up. That's where Guardian of the Wills comes in, and it's an additional 2-drop that we kind of wanted in the deck to make it a little bit more consistent. It can be responsible for some absurd plays, right? Like turn 1, Guardian of the Wills. Turn 2, if you have the initiative, or if they don't kill it, you get to go Jedi Lightsaber into Force Throw because Jedi Lightsaber costs 2. So now you have a 5/5 that gives -2/-2 on attacks that you can also follow it up with things like Force Throw, which will just kill off a unit most likely. It is responsible for some absurd plays, but it's not as reliable, so don't fully commit to this every single time. You need to make sure you have the initiative on that second turn to make sure it lives, because a 2/2 body in this game oftentimes will die. Second 2-drop here, pretty standard stuff. Just a really solid aggro 2-drop in Sabine Wren. It also really is just amazing with upgrades, even though it's not a force unit. If you happen to have things like Yoda or a K2SO or like a Chirrut on the battlefield, you can oftentimes get those 3 aspects really quickly among other friendly units, making it so that she can't be hit. So applying an upgrade to her makes it really valuable because she can't be targeted. Super strong. 3 copies of Yoda. This is one of the most important cards of the deck. He is a force unit. He has a 2/4. Now, normally when you're playing an aggro deck, you're looking at Yoda and you're like, well, that doesn't really seem like a great aggro card. And to be honest, normally it wouldn't be. But the force tag is what makes this really important for the deck. You get to deploy things like Jedi Lightsaber to it, the Forces with Me to it, or Force Throw. It just amplifies all of your different cards in your deck. And the 4 toughness is extremely relevant because if they, let's say, play a 2-drop, play a 3-drop, especially in the aggro decks, there's going to be very few ways for the opponents to deal with it, right? If you think about like the different ways that they could have dealt with it, they have to go like Fleet Lieutenant into potentially trade with your Yoda, or attack your Yoda instead of you with Fleet Lieutenant, or they have to go things like ECL out like an Echo based defender or something like that. Things like that, which are really, really tricky to do. Or they're just going to start getting hit by this force unit that has Restore 2. So it's almost like an immediate deal with threat that has really high toughness. There are, of course, ways that you can deal with it, and it's not going to survive any time, or every time, rather. But if you're able to get to that next turn and you're able to apply like the forces with me, give it a shield token, give it +2/+2, as well as be able to attack with it, you really can have some swingy turns. And of course, you have the action from Chirrut. So if you really want them to live, and if they have, let's say you expect them to have something like, I don't know, a vanquish or a takedown or something, and you're worried about applying like, let's say, a Luke's lightsaber to it, you can always give it +0/+2 and get it out of that range. So just keep that in mind. Next up, we have 2 copies of K2SO. Very nice aggro threat, just a lot of value here. I've used the other mode of this, which is discard a card from their hand when they're dead, or when K2SO dies. Because you're force throwing, you can oftentimes get a lot of value out of making them discard a card from their hand, right? Let's say they go, okay, I have a few plays that I can make. If I get down to like 2-3 cards, which is very common, make them discard a card, make them force throw, or you force throw them, and then you put them in a very awkward position where you're probably doing more than just 2 or 3 damage. So just keep that in mind. In this deck specifically, the other mode can be super relevant. Just 2 copies though, because he's not a force unit. Instead, there's another 4-drop that I really want to play in Kanan. This is another really good reason for you to be in blue. Kanan, 4 synergies, a 4/5, which is a really nice body, and is impossible to raise because it's on attack. It's kind of like Restore 2 very frequently, but you oftentimes will get 1 to 2 damage healed off your base when you're attacking, or at least 1 to 2 damage healed off your base whenever you're attacking. But keep in mind that we do have a hidden synergy here in that we have Sabine. So there are some cases where you might be able to heal 2 to 4 off Kanan, which is really nice. And guess what? You could put all your force cards on Kanan, and he is very good with them because you want to be attacking with this guy. Next up, we have 3 copies of Vigilant Honor Guards. This is kind of a result of not having too many great 5-drops to run in the deck. Well, this one is not bad. It's my favorite of them. There aren't like a ton of amazing options. The Sentinel is really, really nice. You deploy this, it can protect things like Kanan, especially from on turn 5, and this is really important. You have to be aware of ECL Steadfast Battalion, right? Or turn 4, and to be aware of ECL Steadfast Battalion, because what they're going to do is deploy their leader, and then they're going to want to ECL this guy out. But even if you don't have the initiative, you deploy Vigilant Honor Guards, and guess what? It protects your Kanans, it protects your Yodas, it protects whatever you have on the battlefield immediately, which is really, really powerful, okay? Follow that up with, we have 3 copies of Obi-Wan, another force unit, another Sentinel, really powerful force unit, 4/6, same as Vigilant Honor Guards, but when you get those experience counters passing around when it dies, that is really just an amazing swing, especially since this comes right after something like a Chirrut or something like a Kanan or something like a K2, where you're deploying and you're getting a lot of value out of him. Also, you could also just give him like the forces with me, give it 2/2, 6/8, a shield token, and suddenly it's kind of annoying to deal with this guy. Very annoying to deal with him, and we even get more value when he does die. Lastly, and the top of our curve, we have 3 copies of 7-drops. We have 2 copies of Luke and 1 copy of Mace Windu, both force cards, but Luke is definitely the stronger of the 2, I would say, on average. It just is good no matter what. You're going to be able to go ahead and get something -3/-3. It hits those space units, which can be super relevant. It's also just a really thick body, 6/7. It synergizes with Luke's lightsaber, and it has Restore 3. Super, super powerful. and can oftentimes swing the game. It is the most expensive card in the deck by a large margin. We have a few expensive cards, things like K2, Mace Windu, Luke, RRR, and Red 3, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Luke, if you're not interested in using Luke, you could just run the full 3 of Mace Windu, which is like half the price, if not a third of the price. If you don't want to run Mace Windus or Luke's or, a lot of the more expensive cards, unfortunately, you're going to have to take a decent hit, and you probably are just going to want to play either some more expensive ships that we'll get to in a little bit. But to be honest, this one's a little bit more difficult to kind of take out some of the more expensive cards because it kind of relies on a lot of them, right? Like Luke, K2, Mace Windu. I think this is one of the decks that, while it's not like insanely expensive, like running Darth Vader's or anything like that, it is one of the more expensive decks that you may want to consider. Mace Windu, on the other hand, very, very powerful. He gets to smack in immediately, ready him, and boom, suddenly you are hitting again. This is really powerful, especially against the Steadfast Battalions that people ECL out, right? If they don't immediately give it +2/+2, you can respond with the Mace Windu either that turn, right? Assuming they don't do it on turn 4, because Mace Windu is way more expensive. But if they do it a little bit later on, then you can Mace Windu it back, or you could just start hitting things out of the battlefield. Things like Boba Fett it kills, and it has a very, very nice way of doing that. Or heck, even if you have their leader still on the battlefield, this guy can finish it off and then still oftentimes live because of 7 toughness. So very, very strong. Also works with the forces with me. Also works with, Jedi lightsaber, all that type of stuff, all of which are really good on both Luke and Mace Windu. Next up, we have our space units. So starting us off, we have 3 copies of Green Squadron A-Wing, one of the best 2-drops in the game as an aggressive card. Keep in mind, however, it is very poor on defense, so if you're getting attacked with it, then oftentimes their character or their unit's going to trade up way higher than yours, but it is very good on the offense. 3 copies of Restored Arc 170. This is basically just a better Alliance X-Wing, okay? That's how you have to think about it. Look at the Restore 1 and we're not playing it for the Restored 1. We want another 2-drop in the deck, and this is just better Alliance X-Wing, is how you want to look at it, okay? It's also very good against the aggro mirror, so just keep that in mind. 2 copies of Wing Leader, rather. This is a card that you might be surprised, but is really good. It has so many targets. You might be looking at some of the Force cards like Obi-Wan or Yoda, and those cards don't really work with it. But remember, Luke's a rebel, K2, Kanan's a rebel, Sabine's a rebel, Vigi's honor guards are rebels, the Chirrut himself is a rebel, all of which work really well with experience tokens because you get to apply them to the Force units, the ones that are rebels, and then you get to protect them with shield tokens and things like that, which is really, really strong. Next up, we have 3 copies of Red 3. Just a very, very good card to kind of amplify all of your heroism units, which, by the way, all except for the Guardian of the Wills are heroism units. So just a really nice aggressive threat. And lastly, we have 1 copy of Redemption. This is just one of those cards where, because we have so much restore and so many abilities to kind of heal up our units and kind of protect them, right? We have things like Yoda, Luke, Arc 170, things like that. You actually do get to turn 7 against the aggro decks. And if you play Redemption, right, and you just make it take 8 damage and you heal 8, that can oftentimes be the swing that seals the deal for that aggro deck. But there are some cases when it's too expensive, or if you're playing against like Boba Fett or you're playing against Control, right? Just giving a massive Sentinel body on space is really, really good. You don't even need to heal anything, right? You don't need to heal anything from your base if you don't need to. So just keep that in mind. That's going to round out the space units. Let's talk about the sideboard, and I want to talk about the matchups a little bit, which is something that I'm adding to the videos at the end. All right, so talk about the sideboard here. My priorities were focusing on Boba Fett and the aggro decks. This deck actually has a pretty solid win rate against the more controlling decks, because things like Takedown are really bad when you're buffing up your units and giving them experience counters, making them protected with shield tokens and things like that. And, well, you oftentimes just go bigger than the control decks while being aggressive, which is a very nice combination. But our matchup against Boba is the critical flaw of this deck. And so one of the big things that I wanted to think about is, how do we get through Boba? How do we either go bigger than Boba or just survive until we can start playing things that are better than Boba's cards, as well as slotting in a few things that are going to be really good against aggro, because of course that's always a matchup that's, well, dependent on the draw and initiative and all this type of stuff, because this deck really wants to have the initiative to protect some of the force units. So starting us off, we just have 3 copies of Cargo Juggernaut. This is for the aggro, as well as Boba. I found it to be good against both, right? Just healing 4 damage to not get tempoed out too hard can be really, really nice. 1 copy of Luke and 1 copy of Mace Windu. This is really for the Boba matchup, okay? These cards do something immediately when played. That's something really important, because Boba, one of the biggest things that Boba does against your deck is they got waylays. They've got maybe Cantina bouncers if they're mono yellow. They've got, you know, exhaust potential, all of which are nightmares for this deck to deal with. You know, you play a forces with me, which is still good because you get to attack with a unit and get value immediately, but then they can go return it to your hand. And you're like, ooh, that sucks. Now, if you play it on Chirrut, which is something that you have to do oftentimes against Boba, they can't waylay it, right? Because it's non-leader. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. But Luke and Mace Windu come down, they kill something. Come down, they attack something. They do something immediately. They shrink something. Whatever it is, they are very good against the Boba decks. We have 1 copy of Force Lightning. Now, this one is a little bit interesting. I like this siding in against the aggro decks, as well as specifically aggro red heroism decks. And I also like this against the Boba decks. So what this does is, if they play K2SO turn 3, on turn 4, you are actually able to kill K2SO without taking any damage. And that's what I like about Force Lightning. It costs you 3 at base, but you only have to pay 2 more resources and it kills K2SO without you taking any damage. It's really, really nice. But it is a little bit more expensive, so just keep that in mind. That's why I only like the 1 copy. We have 1 more copy of Open Fire. Really, really good against just basically any smaller threat. Not amazing against Boba. I wouldn't recommend siding this against Boba all that often. Instead, I would actually take Make an Opening. So this one's really, really powerful, because Surprise Strike on Crafty Smuggler, or, you know, the 3/2 that's shielded, is really, really nice for them, because they save their unit and they get in for a big chunk of damage or trade up. Make an Opening is the card to deal with their early threats. They go turn 1 Crafty Smuggler. Let's say you go Guardian of the Wills, or you go, I don't know, whatever 2-drop you want to play. Turn 2, maybe they want to surprise strike your unit and save their unit. Well, you might be able to mess them up by playing Make an Opening, because -2/-2 is extremely relevant to deal with those shielded threats. This is a very, very good card against the Boba matchup, and something that I highly recommend you run. It's also just nice for healing some damage off your base. And lastly, you have 1 more copy of Takedown. Again, another very good card for the Boba matchup. Super, super strong at dealing just straight up with Boba Fett himself. The small one. Open Fire does not. One of the reasons why I do not like Open Fire, but I like Takedown. It also just deals with things like that are shielded, right? Where Open Fire does not. So something to keep in mind. The shielding units and the shielded units are really, really annoying to deal with. So just keep in mind, takedowns, no open fires, make an opening, no open fires, things like that. Just to keep in mind when you're playing against these decks. If you're going against control, is there anything that I would side in? Well, Luke and Mace Windu are oftentimes very good against control. And I actually like the Force Lightning against control as well. But again, control doesn't really have a great matchup against us, because they don't have things like bounce spells or tempo plays. They don't really have a ton of interaction that's going to deal super well against getting a creature that's big, with the exception of Power of the Dark Side, if they are running, you know, more controlling like Iden type cards. But you should be able to go ahead and have multiple units to protect yourself against that. And so you don't need to worry about that too much. So that's gonna wrap up the deck here for us. Let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. Let me know if you have any advice, suggestions, or thoughts on this deck. Maybe you've been playing with it yourself. I love to hear all your comments. Y'all have been loving the deck techs and loving the videos. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow. I got a yellow Sabine list that I want to put out because I've been having a ton of fun with that one as well. And I'll see you all tomorrow.